Welcome to this episode of Weather with Blake and Heather. This is a show to learn about all things weather.
I'm Blake Harms, sitting with my co-host Heather Bricka. On this week's episode, we will going to be covering a wide variety of topics.
You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to this week's episode. Now, we've seen quite of the variety of winter weather the past few weeks here in Valpo, and we most recently saw freezing rain and even freezing drizzle. Now, we saw on Monday, January 11th, freezing rain began to hit the ground about 4 p.m. in the evening hours. We saw it hit the ground right before we filmed our news show, 15 News at 5. Now, this ice continued to collect on the pavement until the late hours of the night and even as far into 4 a.m. that next morning. Classes were not canceled for Valparaiso University, which led many students, such as myself, to walk to class early Tuesday morning. Now we have many photos of how much ice collected on the ground, and National Weather Service recorded upwards of 41/100ths of an inch of ice that coated everything. This was a lot of ice on every surface, leaving many students walking to class and commuting to class to slide through their way on campus. Many of us agree that classes should have been at least delayed till noon because by that time the temperatures finally raised back above the freezing temperature into 33 and 34 degrees, enough to let the ice melt off the pavement.
Many people are asking if this is normal to see around this time of year. It took some researching, but we found that we are actually no stranger to these freezing rainstorms here in northern Indiana in this greater Chicagoland area. We saw that a similar freezing rain event happened in northern Indiana on the same exact date, January 11th and 12th, back in 2015. The National Weather Service has this event well recorded in their database, starting off with the surface map of the radar images associated with this event. In this particular event, most places saw upwards of 0.2 inches of ice that covered the ground. In an event like this, the ice really starts to accumulate when the surface stays well below freezing. Temperatures in this event had much of northern Indiana with freezing and well below freezing temperatures, which really caused ice to stick around from anywhere between 0.1 to 0.2 inches. Central Indiana saw more of a snow event than the ice that fell near and around us here in Valparaiso. Now, with all this talk about freezing rain and snow that happened for our area, Heather, what are we going to see in the next week or so for those in Indiana?
Yeah, Blake, well, we have seen 41/100ths of an inch of ice that covered everything in Valparaiso, and that was the same story for around the Chicagoland area. In Aurora, they saw 1/2 of an inch of ice on everything. In DeKalb, same story, 51/100ths of an inch of ice, and in Midway was 46/100ths of an inch. So all around, everything was very icy for that morning commute that next day. Weather alerts going on right now, however, we are under the winter storm watch in Valparaiso because of our cold temperatures and even possible snowfall that happened earlier today. Now, looking at the snowfall RPM model, we are going to be seeing some snow come into our area around Wednesday at 4:30 at 2 inches around that area, and even a little bit more coming on Thursday. Now, by Thursday evening, we're going to see about 2.4 inches still remain in the area. Now, around the surrounding areas are going to see a little bit more. And now that's going to be a little different story for our southern parts of Indiana. That Rensselaer is going to see 2.3 inches of snow, 2.4 in Kankakee, and 2.5 in Chicago. Now, by Thursday, those are really not going to change a lot for our area here. And even on through Thursday, that's still going to be remaining on the ground. Looking at the future radar to time this out for you, Wednesday, we're going to see that snow kind of come into our area and then leave. Most of that's going to be falling in the Chicago area. Now, that's going to transition into that freezing rain, which is that pink that you see right here, and a little bit of rain in the Gary area. Now, I saw earlier today, the model was showing freezing rain in our area right in Thursday morning and even Wednesday morning, but now it's looking like clouds just remaining in the area for Wednesday evening, and even on through Thursday, it'll clear back up. Back to you, Blake.
Well, thank you, Heather. Now talking about all the recent snowfall has got me thinking about the freezing rain we had here And Heather, do you have any interesting stories from Monday's significant weather event?
Well, actually, I kind of do because I had class that evening, and that's when it all started falling around 5 o'clock, and it got even worse into 8 o'clock, and I had class until 9. So by the time I went out to my car, it was totally encased in ice, and I was walking from Schnabel down the hill, and I kept sliding down the hill into Urschel Hall. So that was not fun for me.
Yeah, well, it sounds like there have been quite a few students who have met with administration, and they've admitted that they've made a mistake looking at making policy changes moving forward so that they don't get themselves caught in a situation like this again.
Yeah, I know that Student Senate is looking into this as well to see what parameters are really a call for calling off school, and if David, our staff meteorologist, has any say, because Phelps did mention that he did consult David when he didn't. So we really have to take a look at what weather we're going to be having and how it's going to affect us in the morning time.
Right. Well, and I had to drive the campus shuttle that night, and driving a large bus around a sheet of ice, the campus roads, they did all right. The sidewalks were icy, but the roads were all right as soon as you got off campus, county plows hadn't quite gotten around, and I was sliding around quite a bit. So a lot of factors to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, of course, especially when you're taking other kids in the bus. It's not very safe.
No, not at all.
Thanks, Blake. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to have an exciting interview later on the show, and even more interesting story about how Louisiana is completely underwater. Stick with us.
Welcome back. Now we have this new and very unique story. Get this, parents were scared to send their kids to school in remote archipelago due to a polar bear invasion in residential areas. Novaya Zemlya, which is located off Russia's northeastern Arctic coast, is where these polar bears have found their new home since past December. Now, the settlement that is the region's largest with the most polar bears is Belushia Guba. This settlement in particular has about 2,500 people in population living there and reported over 50 sightings. The local administrator, Miniev, said these polar bears have attacked the people living here, along with the announcement with a state of emergency over the weekend that there were over 10 polar bears in one given spot at any time. Many of these polar bears have migrated down from their original homes in the Arctic because they are scurrying around for food due to their huge reduction in the sea ice due to recent melting.
Now, on the same topic of ice forming and reducing, other countries are making steps to make their population think greener. Now, China and India are the two main countries making these leaps, and NASA came out with a new report that stated these countries have still led the rest of the countries in the top pollutions. Now, they are now accounted for the two main countries with the biggest increase in foliage. NASA said that this is because of the major tree planting projects and increase in agriculture. All of this contributed to 5% increase in just a recent year. Now, the initiative is crucial in helping reduce the pollution because China and India account for 1/3 of the world's greenery. They only contain 9% of the planet's land covered in vegetation, but all in all, this was a crucial step for both China and India.
Well, last month's polar vortex wasn't enough to offset record high temperatures across the globe. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, this past January was the third hottest since records keeping began 140 years ago. Temperatures across oceans and land were 1.58 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than last century's average. Looking at land only, temperatures were 2.72 degrees warmer. Parts of Australia, Brazil, Africa, and Asia set records for the hottest Januaries they have ever seen. 10 of the warmest January global surface temperatures have occurred since 2002. No record lows were set this January, but parts of North America did experience below average temperatures. On the same topic of global warming, we have Colin Luft here, our very own digital director of VUTV. He's joining us today to talk about global warming. Colin, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Blake.
So what's your take on the Arctic ice situation? And it sounds like there's some differing reports there on what's actually happening.
Yeah, so one of the biggest hoaxes out there is the fact that Arctic ice is disappearing, Antarctic ice is melting, and that means that the Earth is warming. If we look at satellite data from NASA, that's just simply not the case. Arctic ice is not melting. If we look at the Antarctic, even more specifically, between 1992 and 2001, it grew by 112 billion tons. A decade later, 2003 to 2008, it grew by 82 billion tons. Now, that is a decrease in the amount that it was growing, but the fact is that it slowed doesn't necessarily mean that it's melting.
You know, in our climatology class here at Valpo, we do talk a lot about where the ice is and how it's affecting, and using SOI NAO data, which brings in all the data for many years and analyzing it across the globe. And even though you're looking at a specified spot of where there's Arctic ice that's melting or not melting or reducing slowly, it's important to keep the whole globe in a perspective when you're looking at those things.
Well, we just see that the climate across not only centuries, millennia, just across the entire Earth's existence, climate has always been changing. Okay, we started off, we had Pangea, a supercontinent. We had an ice age. None of those were due to the humans. And the fact that, yes, maybe certain areas, climate's changing over time. The Sahara Desert wasn't always a desert. It used to be a lush green rainforest. But that's not necessarily our fault. That's just how our Earth grows.
I do believe a lot of our warming and changes in our atmosphere is very cyclic in the way that is always changing, warming, cooling. But I do think that some ice is melting in the Arctic, that it has shown on our SOI data and NAO data in our research here.
And it kind of goes back to that central question of what this whole argument is based off of. It's pretty clear that the climate is changing to some extent, but the main question is this because of humans, or, like we've mentioned, is it just because of cyclic data?
Well, one thing I want to bring up, I'm not a meteorologist like you guys, but I'm an engineer, and so I understand thermal energy pretty well. And a lot of times we talk about the fact that cities, we look at the increase of temperatures within cities. Well, historically, temperatures have been recorded at airports. And I brought a picture here. This is Chicago O'Hare in 1950. Okay, there's nothing around it. It is farmland, it is fields. Obviously, we've all seen Chicago O'Hare today, very different. So when we look at the fact that urban areas have grown around the airports that might not necessarily have had that before, that can definitely cause an influx of thermal energy in that area, causing the temperatures to increase over time.
Yeah, we have talked about long wave and short wave radiation in the atmosphere in climatology, and how it really does affect if there's populace that is in an area that wasn't there before. It, of course, is going to produce more thermal energy, which is then going to, in turn, warm the rest of the planet. And it's very important to look at the population as a whole and how it's having an effect. And I think it's interesting to see both sides of the argument here. Well, thanks, Colin, for joining us. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the polar vortex and how it affected the insects. Stick with us. Welcome back. Next up, we'll be getting into the flooding Louisiana story and also covering everything that happened post-polar vortex from earlier this February.
Well, since the polar vortex, many people have been curious how those snow totals have added up for the year, averages for Chicago and surrounding areas. Now, to give everyone a better idea, it looks like the Chicago area's season-to-date numbers are 36.1 total inches of snow. The normal for this time of year is usually about 25 inches, and last year we were just over that normal, sitting at 28.3 inches. The count for how many days we have had with measurable snow is 29 days, and the normal is 19. And the one that pertains to most of the recent weather is the 12 days of freezing rain or drizzle that fell. Pretty remarkable.
Now, getting to records of Indiana specifically, we have the freezing rain totals across the board. Now, the average amount of days per year that receive freezing rain looks like Valparaiso, Indiana, is right on the cusp of 3 to 4 days of freezing rain. Now, just this year, we are ahead of that average, sitting at 12 days already. We also have data from amount of hours it has for freezing rain total in the Illinois region. The Chicago area receives anywhere from 6 to 9 hours. Now, the northern Indiana, including Valparaiso, they receive just a bit more, sitting at 9 to 12 hours on average of freezing rain. The snowfall throughout this month of February looks like January month got a total of 18.2 inches of snow, contrasted with the 10.8 inches of normal in February. Now, we've already received 3.8 inches compared to the 4.9 inches normal throughout February 14th.
Now, on to that story we promised earlier. We have a really interesting story about how Louisiana is coping with the extreme flooding that happens year after year. A coastal Louisiana community says it's victim of climate change, rising water, and erosion have wiped out 98% of the town. Now the federal government is spending millions to move families north before their homes vanish. CNN's Bill Ware explains.
Bye.
When these kids are old enough to start families, their hometown will be underwater.
This is my grandma's house.
Their great-great-great-grandparents settled here during the Trail of Tears. And for the first 100 years, they farmed this land.
You just raised that exact house above, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But in the last 30 years, they had to raise their homes a few feet to stay dry. And then a few feet more. Until before and after satellite pictures proved what they already knew. 98% of Ile-de-Jean-Charles, Louisiana, has disappeared.
I always talk about water as our life and our death. Once we weren't able to farm anymore, the waters, the shrimp, the oysters, the crabs that sustain our people, now was killing us. It's killing us.
Every hour of every day, a piece of Louisiana about the size of a football field slips into the sea. Every hour, every day. It started when America tamed, locked, and diked the mighty Mississippi, choking off the natural flow of mud that built this land. But these days, as it sinks, polar ice melts. Seas rise, big storms just keep coming.
There has been a lot of change in just the last, say, 5 years.
And those who study the drowning of Louisiana say it is happening faster than anyone ever predicted.
What maybe 5 years ago was the worst case scenario is now what we might call a fairly likely scenario.
That's terrifying.
It is terrifying. And it basically means that climate change is here in full force.
So, Ile-de-Jean-Charles won a first-of-its-kind federal grant, $48 million, to move them about 40 miles north. The state recently closed on 500 acres of old sugarcane fields.
We're going to have baseball fields, fishing ponds, wetlands, homes along the back.
But before they can even break ground,
We just had a tribal meeting today.
they are getting a harsh lesson in just how hard it is to convince Americans to uproot and retreat.
Anybody else is probably not moving. Really? So, yeah.
Half of the 40 families who live here say they will never leave, while others still aren't convinced it's the right move.
This so-called climate change thing. So,
You put it in quotes,
yeah,
so-called.
that's right.
But Ile-de-Jean-Charles is just a tiny sample of how expensive and difficult the future will be. According to one estimate from the United Nations, between 50 and 200 million people will be displaced by climate change by the year 2050. And most of those are the planet's most vulnerable, fishermen and farmers who live on the edge. And if it is this hard moving a village, imagine moving Miami or New Orleans.
Do you have children?
I have an 8-year-old daughter.
Do you think she will ever be able to, say, take out a 30-year mortgage in New Orleans?
I don't know. That is, I wouldn't bet my money on it. Let's put it that way.
But he says it is not too late to stop burning the carbon that is cranking up the global thermostat. Not too late to stop worst-case pain. But that will depend more on human nature than Mother Nature. And as people argue, the seas rise every hour of every day. Bill Weir, CNN, Ile-de-Jean-Charles, Louisiana.
The story really hits home for those who have felt the ramifications from the recent flooding. It's truly a sad story.
Yes, well, thank you, Blake, for that story. And we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up some of the most interesting stories about the polar vortex and even the super snow blood moon to look out for February.
You won't want to miss it. Stick with us.
Thanks for sticking with us. Now, there's an interesting story about how the polar vortex contributed to killing off some bad insects in the surrounding areas. Now let's take a look at this Virginia Tech research experiment estimated that the polar vortex that happened at just the beginning of this month may have been responsible for killing 95% of stink bugs. Now, many of these stink bugs that weren't able to take shelter before the deep freeze were killed off as soon as the polar vortex. Now, sometimes other species of bugs in the Northeast, like the emerald ash borer and the southern pine beetle, are more able to adapt to the freezing temperatures. However, this wasn't the case for the stink bugs.
Now get set for the super snow blood moon that is happening soon for northern Indiana areas. This is the biggest supermoon of the year. Today, February 19th, the super rare snow moon will emerge. This supermoon during the February month is referred to as the snow moon because during this time of year, we typically record the heaviest snowfall. Now, supermoons occur when the moon's orbit brings it to the closest point on Earth's orbit while the moon is full. When this full moon comes closest to the Earth, the moon is lit with more light than regular full moons, according to Earth's sky. The moon is approximately 221,734 miles away from us when the moon rises. It will appear even more large than usual because of the moon illusion. The moon will continue to fascinate scientists and people around the world. 2019 marks the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing. So now, talking about the moon that occurred today and the polar vortex stink bug extermination, I'm just amazed at how many bugs were killed off. I'm very thankful that they're finally, hopefully gone.
Yeah, for sure. I really don't like stink bugs, and they are coming into my apartment this year, so I'm glad that most of them were outside, were able to be killed. I did hear that most of them that did lay eggs will not be able to they will hatch when it gets warmer, so we will still have more stink bugs. They won't go completely away, but not as much as we did have.
It's fascinating to me that they just seem to pop up everywhere year round.
They're just annoying.
Yeah, in the dorms, even outside sometimes in the middle of winter, and it's remarkable that they can stay alive through that. But
I think they're really tough bugs too.
Yeah.
And talking about the moon, I think it's pretty crazy to see that it's called the super snow blood moon because it's so big, large, bright in the sky during the snowfall during this year.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it certainly produces a beautiful image, especially for those who have snow on the ground. A nice reflection off there. But, this is our second big moon event of the year where we had the super rare blood wolf moon just last month.
Yeah, 2020 is a year for big moons, it looks like. And even the significant Apollo landing anniversary is very important too. And we'll have to see if we can even see the super blood moon tonight.
Yeah, cloud cover prevented us from watching the last one.
Yeah, it did.
And even looking forward, we have another total eclipse coming up in just a few years, not far south of us. So a lot of exciting events coming up in our solar system.
Yeah, definitely. I agree that it's definitely one of the better areas to be in to see these kinds of moons.
Yeah, as long as we can stay clear.
Yes, for sure. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about an interesting story, and you won't want to miss it.
Stick with it. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us for this week's episode. A solar flare that is 10 million times more powerful than Earth solar blasted out of Orion's sword. In November of 2016, astronomers observed a star 1,500 light years away that exploded plasma and radiation that was about 10 billion times more powerful than any other flare observed from Earth. The star explosion is helping scientists really understand more of this process. Solar flares occur when the star's magnetic field lines tangle inside each other until they snap, which then releases huge amounts of energy in charged particles. The science behind why this happened is still not clear to scientists, but they will be able to better understand what is going on between stars through this explosion.
Now, many of us are still tired for never seeing the sunlight, but that will soon enough change for us in exactly 1 month away. Now, we'll finally see a 7 p.m. sunset, and this is due in part by daylight savings time. However, we are gaining sunlight at a rate about 2 minutes and 45 seconds per day. Even though we can still see snow in the forecast, the days of vitamin D deprived are becoming shorter and shorter.
Well, we'll take every second of sunshine we can get.
We definitely need to.
Yes. Well, we're going to take one last break, and when we come back, we're going to cover one more fun story before the end of this episode. Welcome back.
Now, before we go, take a look at this story. Some people in the Nevada area got a special gift this President's Day: snow. A fair amount of snow fell overnight Monday and into Tuesday morning. Now, people there, especially in the Anthem and Seven Hills areas, wasted no time getting their hands on the fresh powder. Orca Manna reports.
I'm a 60-year-old kid right about now. Life's good.
Childlike wonder at the sight of snow. People who live in the Anthem area of Henderson say it's been years since they last dealt with this kind of dusting.
I loved it because I woke up about 2:30 in the morning. I saw snow, and I went outside in the snow. I thought it was the greatest thing.
I got up this morning and looked out and oh my.
Some were surprised by the snowfall, but say it was made all the more magical thanks to the clear conditions.
Aren't we lucky we get to see snow, but we get to see sun too. Unlike the Midwest where they get snow and no sun.
This family spent hours under the sun stacking up some snowmen. They wanted to make the most of their very own winter wonderland.
And been awake since 6 o'clock to get him out to play in the snow because we don't ever get to see it that often in the valley. I've probably seen him maybe like 6, 7 times since I've been living in the state.
Why do you think you have so much fun in the snow?
Because it's fun building snowman and making taller than us. It's rounding out a little more.
Whether building some buddies,
it's gorgeous,
or savoring the scenery, people in Henderson say there's so much to love about these fantastic flurries.
I was like a kid in a candy store.
Orkomana 8 News Now.
What a great surprise for those that don't normally get to see snow.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure if we get any more, I'd be more than happy to ship it down.
We totally can.
Yeah. All right, well, we wanted to thank you for watching this episode of Weather with Blake and Heather. If you want to see that and more, be sure to follow our Facebook page, VUTV Weather, our Twitter, and also our Instagram, VUTV. Our VUTV Weather Facebook page has helpful forecasts for what you should expect for living in the greater Valparaiso area. Be sure to share exciting weather events with us, and if you want to be more connected to us, follow our shows and stories on YouTube. We have all VUTV content on our YouTube and website at valpo.vutv.org for you to rewatch every week.
Now, our next show, we'll be talking about even more current events and what to expect for spring weather. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Weather with Blake and
Hopefully
Heather.
it's spring by the time we get to the next episode.
I really hope so.
Fingers crossed. Well, be sure to watch our next episode, and we'll see you next time.